بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نبدأ محاضرتنا هذا اليوم في مادة General Anatomy، وهي على آخر موضوع في الساينس the Anatomy of Air. The anatomy of air divided it into three parts: the outer air, middle air, inner air. The outer air that include vena, external auditory canal, and middle air that include tympanic membrane, eardrum, and auditory ossicles that malleus and stapes, and middle air cavity, and the last one, ostican tube. The inner air that include oval window, round window, cochlea, semicircular canals. The ear divided into three parts. The first part, external ear; second part, middle ear; third part, inner ear. The external and middle ear are mainly concerned with the transverse of sound to the internal ear. The internal ear is for hearing and balancing equilibrium. That means the balance of body that concentrated within inner ear, and changing of the hair sound, hair impulse to electrical impulse. We start from the external ear. The external ear consists of auricle, vena, the external auditory canals, tympanic membrane. The external ear, the auricle, the vena, is made of elastic cartilage that consists from hilux, lobule, air lobule. The external auditory canal lie within the temporal bone and connect to eardrum, tympanic membrane, and contains circumvenous gland which secrete ear wax. The tympanic membrane that consists epithelial and simple cuboidal epithelial that forming the membrane, changing acoustic energy into mechanical energy. The perforated eardrum due to tear of the membrane. We start with the first part of the external ear is the auricle. Vena is on the side of the head and assists in capturing sound. It consists of cartilage covered with skin and arranged in a pattern of various elevation and depression. The large outside rim of auricle is hilux. It ends inferiorly at the fleshy lobule called earlobe. The lobe is the only part of the auricle is not supported by cartilage. It consists of fibrous tissue, fat, and blood vessel. It is easily pierced for taking a small blood sample and inserting a ring that inserts in the air loop. The hollow center of the auricle is conchae of auricle. At the depth of the conchae is the opening of external acoustic meatus. Thus, anterior to the opening of the external acoustic meatus in front of the conchae is an elevation called the tragus. This figure shows the part of auricle. The first from external to inside. First, the elevation called hilux, and then depression called anti-hilux, and from go inside of the hilux, we have elevation, triangular elevation called anti-tragus, and there are at the end of hilux called it fleshy of dot and cartilage called lobule, and beyond the anti-hilux we have depression called it Cochlea, and the triangular elevation in front of external acoustic meatus called it tragus. Opposite the tragus, the above fleshy lobule is another elevation called it antitragus, a smaller curved rim parallel and anterior to the helix is the antihelix. The antihelix divided above into two legs or corra. In between this corra is a depression called triangular fossa. A curved depression lies between the helix and antihelix and is called the scapha and scaphoid fossa. These figures shows all structure of the ear. From outside, the outside elevation is helix, and then the antihelix. Within the antihelix, we have scapha, scaphoid fossa, and beyond the antihelix, there is conchi camp, and there are external acoustic meatus, and is opening for the this duct, and below the helix we have antitragus and lobule, and inside in front of the external acoustic meatus we have intratragic notch, and posterior to it tragus. The muscle with auricle. We have two types of muscle in the auricle, either intrinsic muscle or extrinsic muscle. The intrinsic muscles pass between the cartilaginous part of the auricle and may change the shape of the auricle. They include helicus major, helicus minor, tragus, antitragus, transverse muscle, oblique muscle. The extrinsic muscle passes from the scalp of the skull to the auricle and may also play a role in the positioning of the auricle. We have three muscles. According to its location, we have anterior auricular muscle, superior auricular muscle, and posterior auricular muscle. Both groups of muscles are innervated by facial nerve, stiffened cranial nerve. This muscle have limited in its action, and rudimentary muscle have no effect on the position of the auricle. حقيقة هي تأثيرها كلش قليل، فقط يوجد أشخاص يستطيعون التحكم بموقع صوان الأذن. The blood supply. The arterial blood supply through posterior auricular artery and superficial temporal artery that give the branching of to the auricle. Venous drainage through vessels following the artery. I mean, there are posterior auricular vein and superficial temporal vein. This figure shows the muscles that have within the ear, the internal muscle that is an external muscle from outside to inside. This is the internal muscle, the heligus major, the heligus minor, tragus, the antitragus, the either oblique muscle, transverse muscle, and the auricular superior and auricular posterior. This is the internal and external muscle. This figure shows the external muscle, three muscles, the anterior auricle, superior auricle, and posterior auricular that origin from the side of the temporal bone and insertion within the muscle, the skin of the auricle. Innervation of the auricle. The sensory innervation by superficial surface supply by great auricular nerve, auriculotemporal branch of mandibular division of trigeminal nerve, anterior superior portion. Lesser occipital nerve is a branch of posterior superior portion that have give its innervation to superficial surface. The parts are supplied by facial nerve, 7th cranial nerve, vagus nerve, 10th cranial nerve through auricular branch. The lymphatic drainage. The drain of lymph of auricle through three lymph vessels, anteriorly into parotid nodes, posteriorly into mastoid node, possibly into upper deep cervical node directly. This This figure shows the distribution of the innervation of the deep part. That red triangular is vagus and round circular fascia. So we can see most of the auricle by the vagus cranial nerve, and less inside it in the center of the auricle by fascia. Around this area, we have three nerves. That first one, auriculotemporal branch of mandibular division, and lesser occipital nerve from the cervical 2, and greater auricular nerve from cervical 2 and cervical 3, that outside of the auricle innervation. Then we go in the center of auricle. We have an opening for external acoustic meatus. External acoustic meatus extend from this part of the conchi to tympanic membrane, eardrum, a distance of approximately 1 inch in its length, 2.5 centimeters. Its walls consist of cartilage and bony part. The lateral 1/3 is from cartilaginous extension from some of the auricular cartilage. The middle 2/3 is a bony tunnel in the temporal bone. Throughout its length, external acoustic meatus is covered with the skin. The sum of skin contains hair and modified sweat glands, producing chromium ear wax to protect the eardrum for any perforation. Chromium protects the skin of the ear canal and assists in cleaning and lubricate, and also provides some protection from bacteria, fungi, infection, and water. This figure shows the external acoustic meatus in cross-section, in the coronal cross-section from the auricle to the tympanic membrane called eardrum. It has two parts. The first part is laterally is the cartilaginous part, is the continuity of the cartilage of auricle, and within the temporal bone that is a canal within that forming the bony part of external acoustic meatus. And finally, we finish with the tympanic membrane, or call it eardrum. Is a membrane that separates the external acoustic meatus from the middle ear. Is a thin, oval, semi-transparent membrane, approximately 1 centimeter in diameter. Is covered with the skin externally and with the mucous membrane of the middle ear internally. When viewed through an osteoscope, the tympanic membrane appears concave toward the external acoustic meatus with shallow cone-like central depression. The peak of this cone-like depression is called amba of the tympanic membrane. The lower end of the handle of malleus is attached to amba of the tympanic membrane. Superior to the handle of malleus, a small deviation called its lateral process of malleus. The part of tympanic membrane superior to lateral process of the malleus is thin and is called the last part, parus placide. The remaining part of the membrane is thick and is called the tense part, or parsa tensa. The parsa placida lack the radical and circular fiber present in the remaining part of the membrane. The anterior inferior quadrant of membrane is a bright triangular reflection of light called cone of light. This region is usually visible when examining the tympanic membrane with an otoscope. This figure shows how the tympanic membrane is separate between the external ear and the internal middle ear. The external ear that is oval in shape, that covered by the skin of the external acoustic meatus, and from outside. And from inside, within the middle ear, is covered by the mucous membrane of middle ear. We have a connect with the first first ossicle of the middle ear bone that call it malleus. Now we start with the feature of the tympanic membrane from upside down, from up by the depression, call it varus flaccida, and down to it there are elevation, call it lateral process of the insertion of the origin of the malleus, and the to it is posterior malleus fold, and beyond to the anterior malleus bone we have anterior malleus fold, and then the handle of the malleus, and the end with the umbo of the tympanic membrane, and in the lower part we have a cone, triangular in shape, call it cone of light, that transmit the light through the tympanic membrane. This figure shows the same figure as above, that have the malleus bone within the tympanic membrane, and is relation between this auricular bone and how can attack to it. The innervation of the tympanic membrane from external surface, that tympanic membrane is supplied by the auriculotemporal nerve branch of the third cranial nerve. Its main configuration is the part of it supplied by this nerve, and we have a small auricular branch of the vagus, the 10th cranial nerve, from internal surface of tympanic membrane is supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve, the 9th cranial nerve. Now, and after finishing of tympanic membrane, we go to inside of the ear. There are middle ear. The middle ear is a cavity called middle ear cleft. Eustachian tube, auditory, auditus, antrum, mustard air cell. That's its part. Divided into mesotympanium, epitympanium, and hypotympanium. It's linked to six-sided of box. It is as a box of 6 sides. The middle ear is the narrow air field jumper in the petrous part of temporal bone. It has a cavity called a tympanic cavity. The part of middle ear, the cavity has two parts, the tympanic cavity proper and epitympanic recess. The tympanic cavity proper is the space directly internal to the tympanic membrane, while the space superior to the membrane is called epitympanic recess. The middle ear communicates with the mustard area, mustard antrum posteriorly. It communicates anteriorly with nasopharynx via pharyngeotympanic tube. The content of middle ear. It have the first auditory ossicles, 3 ossicles, malleus, incus, and stapes. The and stapedius and anterior tensor tympani muscle, chordae tympani nerve, a bunch of the 7 cranial nerve, facial nerve, and tympanic plexus of nerve. The wall of the cavity have the 6th wall. The middle ear is shaped like a narrow box with concave sides. It has 6 walls, which include tegmental wall, the roof of the tympanic cavity, jugular wall, the floor of the tympanic cavity, membranous wall, lateral wall of the tympanic cavity through tympanic membrane. The labyrinth wall is medial wall of the tympanic cavity within inner ear, carotid wall, anterior wall, and mastoid wall is posterior wall. This 6th wall has a box that form the tympanic. This figure shows the 5th wall, and the anterior wall is out of this figure, so it's the imaginary figure for the middle wall, roof, floor, the anterior and posterior wall. This figure shows the content of the tympanic cavity, that the middle ear space. This is the epitympanic recess from outside, and the three bony ossicle, malleus, incus, stapes, and we have called the tympanic nerve and tensor tympanic muscle, tympanic membrane, and from posteriorly is petrosal nerve, terminus of lateral semicircular canal, and the facial nerve, the seventh cranial nerve that enter from inner ear to middle ear, and we have a diatus to mastoid antrum, opening to the mastoid antrum, forming posterior wall, terminus of canal of facial nerve that within the middle ear, tympanic plexus on promontory and sapedius and pyramidal eminence, and on the anteriorly the tympanic nerve from the ninth cranial nerve, glossopharyngeal nerve. The content of the middle ear, first I would say ossicle. We have smallest bone in body. First, malleus and incus and stapes. The malleus attached to eardrum and articulate with the incus. Incus articulate with the stapes. Stapes stirrup football plate of steps fit in the oval window. Its opening within the middle ear is called Eustachian tube. This figure shows the malleus. Its shape as anatomy is from upside down. It is upside, they call head of malleus that have the incus articulation with the incus bone, and then the neck is concentrated of the bone that connect to the three parts, the anterior process and lateral process, and the end with the handle of malleus. The incus bone starts from the head, and we have short process beyond the head and articulation with the malleus, and then below it longest process and lenticular process that articulate with stapes. This figure shows the stapes that have upward the head and then the neck, and there are two processes that call it anterior process and posterior process, and the oval in shape is the base that have within the window of inner ear, oval window. This figure shows the arrangement of three bone, incus, malleus, and stapes that within middle ear. The muscle of the middle ear, we have two muscle protection by tiny muscles, tensor tympani and sapedius muscle. The tensor tympani attached to malleus to increase tension on ear drum and prevent damage to the inner ear. So this muscle absorbs the strong voice that cannot damage the inner ear. The sapedius muscle, the smallest skeletal muscle, dampen large vibration of the stapes to protect oval window. And within the middle ear, the Eustachian tube, or call it auditory tube, is a route for pathogens to travel from nose and throat to ear, causing otitis media. During the swallowing and yawing, it opens to equal pressure in middle ear. The wall of the tympanic cavity of the middle ear, there are first the roof of it called a tegmental wall, is formed by a thin plate of bone called a tegment tympani. This bone separates the tympanic cavity from the middle cranial fossa. The floor of the tympanic cavity is jugular wall. It is formed by a layer of bone that separates the tympanic cavity from internal jugular vein. Near the middle border of the floor is small aperture through which the tympanic branch from glossopharyngeal nerve, ninth cranial nerve, enter the middle ear. The lateral wall, or call it membranal wall, is formed mostly by the tympanic membrane and superiorly by the bony wall of the epitympanic recess. And from the medial wall, or call it labyrinth wall, separate the tympanic cavity from the internal ear, also the lateral wall of the internal ear. The features of this wall include promontory of the labyrinth wall around bulge produced by the basal colli of Cochlea, oval window, and round window. Carotid wall, the anterior wall, is separates the tympanic cavity from the carotid canal. Superiorly, it has the opening of the pharyngeo-tympanic tube canal for tensor tympani. The last wall is posterior wall is mastoid wall, has an opening called the adductus to the mastoid antrum. The adductus to the mastoid antrum connects the tympanic cavity epitympanic recess to the mastoid air cell or sinus. Note, the mastoid antrum is cavity continuation with the collection of air-filled space, called it mastoid cell, throughout the mastoid part of the temporal bone. This figure shows the mastoid air cell to the mastoid antrum and its connection with middle ear by adductus of mastoid antrum. Now go to inside of the ear is the internal ear. The internal ear, or call it labyrinth. The bony labyrinth contains pre-lymph and semicircular canal and vestibule cochlea. The content of the middle inner ear. The continuous pre-lymphs and then semicircular canals that have two parts, anterior, posterior, and lateral, and lie right angle to each other. The vestibule, we have oval portion. The cochlea look like a snail, convert mechanical energy to electrical energy. And we have a membranous membrane contained the endolymph. So with bony membranous, the pre-lymph, and within membranous membrane that contain endolymph. The inner ear. Inner ear exists within the temporal bone, vitreous portion of the temporal bone. This is complex structure. It's located in the bony cavity called bony labyrinth, or call it maze. It is filled with a fluid called perilymph, which is similar to CSF, or that present within the cranial cavity. Within the bony labyrinth is the membranous labyrinth, filled with the endolymph. One of the membranous structure is the cochlea, snail shell. This is responsible for hearing. The other structure is responsible for balance and consists of three parts: semicircular canals, utricle, and saccule. This figure shows the structure of inner ear. The connection of middle ear through the trabeus through oval wound to the semicircular canal and to the auricle and sacculus, and the cochlear layer that connect to the vestibulocochlear nerve, the eighth cranial nerve. The semicircular canal, we have three parts. That's superior and posterior and lateral semicircular canal, and that have the through this part the balance of the body it is, and through cochlea the present of the connection with the vestibulocochlear nerve for the formation of the sound. Instead of drawing cochlea cord up, I have drawn it lying out straight. The temporal bone, the perilymph, membranous labyrinth, and there are endolymph. And we have from outside the oval window that connect with the stapes of the ossicle of the middle ear. We start first with the cochlea. Inside the cochlea are special neurons called hair cells. They are axon from the eighth cranial nerve, cochlear nerve. The stapes is attached to oval window, and vibration causes the perilymph to vibrate the hair cell. Hair transmit this vibration. Therefore, the hair cells in this region are receptor for hearing. Second one is the cochlea. In the cross section of the cochlea, we can see the hair cell touch the lateral membrane and the eighth cranial auricular nerve that the formation of the heat. The cochlea, the lower frequencies like the longer string of piano causes response in the tip of cochlea. High frequencies cause a response at the large end of a cochlea. We have two hair cells for lower frequency and for higher frequency. The hair cells are connected to the eighth cranial nerve, vestibulocochlear nerve, which takes the signal to the brain. Therefore, the cochlea is where the hearing receptors are located, so the cochlea is responsible for all of the hearing of the sound. However, the ear does more than just hear, it is also responsible for balance and equilibrium. The vestibular system. This system regulates balance. It's also within the inner ear. We have semicircular canals, three of them in different planes, determine movement in three planes. Within each semicircular canal is endolymph and hair cells, which connect to nerves that go to the cerebellum. When you move in one direction, like sliding across the room, the float slush like a cup of coffee, and it makes their hair cell move. The last part is a utricle and saccule. Attached to the semicircular canal are two joint structures called utricle and the saccule. These also contain hair cells and endolymph. Within the endolymph hair are the otoliths hair rocks, which are calcium deposited. When you stand perfectly upright, this otoliths fall directly downward and beyond the hair cell, a special type of neuron on the lower cells. When you tip your head to the side, they will stimulate the hair on that side. The otoliths stimulate the hair cell to tell you what position your head is in and give you a sense of equilibrium. Therefore, the hair cells in this region are receptor for equilibrium, and two otoliths are an essential component of this process. Through this figure, we can see the anatomy and function of otoliths. Otoliths is the calcium deposit on the hair cell within endolymph that the formation of the balance of the body. When tilt the head from upright position to any direction, that change of otoliths in its position with the endolymph, so we can know what's the position of your body. Summary of hair, how we hear. The acoustic energy in the form of sound wave is channeled into the ear canal by the pinna. Sound wave hit the tympanic membrane and cause it to vibrate like a drum, changing it into mechanical energy. The malleus, which is attached to the tympanic membrane, starts the ossicle into motion. The stapes move in and out of oval window of the cochlea, creating a fluid motion or hydraulic energy. The fluid movement causes membrane in the origin of corti to shear against the hair cell. This creates an electrical signal which is sent up to auditory nerve, the cochlear nerve, to the brain. The brain interprets it as a sound. الحقيقة هي تبدي بالsound energy that voice and go to the tympanic membrane تحولها إلى mechanical energy and within three ossicles go to the inner ear تحولها إلى electrical energy من خلال eighth cranial nerve لتروح إلى البرين وتتحلل في البرين and can not change it to the sound. Thank you for your listening this lecture. إلى أي سؤال كنت تسألوه من خلال العملي.